The Mongol Empire was begun around the year 1200 by the famous Genghis Khan, in his own language Temujin, in Mongolia. Mongolia is a country way over here in the east that sits on top of modern China. Genghis Khan and his successors had an amazing career of world conquest, and the empire reached its largest extent under his grandson Kublai Khan, who died in 1294. He's also the founder of the Yuan dynasty in China. His capital is in the city that's now called Beijing. Now, at this point, you should say, what does this have to do with Islam? They come from the Far East. It wasn't, up to this point, Islamic territory, and they weren't Muslims at the beginning. Genghis Khan held on to the traditional polytheistic religion of Mongolia, although he had a general policy of religious toleration, as makes sense if you're going to conquer a whole bunch of different peoples with different religions. At its largest extent, the Mongol Empire was divided up into 4 administrative parts, and eventually 3 of those 4 divisions ended up converting to Islam, as did many of the small countries which eventually resulted from this empire's breakup. This empire then became a vehicle for spreading Islam far to the east and somewhat to the north of where it had been up to that time. Like all humongous empires, it simply couldn't be held together after a certain amount of time. The next and longest-lived Islamic empire was the Ottoman Empire. This was founded by Osman or Uthman I. The Ottomans became champions of militant Islam. You can see their expansion on this map. This was their homeland in this portion of what's now the modern nation of Turkey, and they expanded outward from there, conquering more and more territory. And notice they get pretty far into Eastern Europe here, almost into Western Europe. You can see that at their height, the empire was quite large, quite spread out, and controlled quite a lot of important territory. One high point in their conquest was their taking the ancient Christian Patriarchate of Constantinople right here. This was done by Sultan Mehmet II in 1453. This included the famous Hagia Sophia Church, or Holy Wisdom Church. From 360 to 1453, it had almost continuously been the Cathedral of Constantinople. This was turned into a mosque from 1453 to 1934, and in 1934, the secular government of modern Turkey turned it into a museum, which anyone can visit today. The Ottoman Empire was unexpanded in the 19th and 20th centuries, the last big event being World War I. Their territory was whittled back down until it basically became the modern nation of Turkey. Another great Islamic empire that we'll mention quickly is the Mughal Empire, which ruled most of India at one time. It lasted in some form or other for over 300 years. It was founded by Babur in 1530, and we talked about this a little bit when discussing India in one of our Hinduism lectures. The Mughal or Mughal Empire was eventually weakened by Hindu pushback brought on by attempts at forced conversion, and also by European colonialism. They were succeeded as rulers over India, or most of India, by the British. With the end of the Mughal empires and the Ottoman Empire, that was, so far, the end of the great Islamic empires. Historian Solomon Agosian observes that, to many Muslims, this shattering reversal of the normal historical course of events remains inexplicable. Since Muhammad's days, many pious Muslims have believed that divine favor normally translates to military and political success. They expect that the house of Islam, that the rule of Islam, the submission of the human race to God's will, should continue apace, that territory should not be lost, but should always be expanding. In the 1800s, they were quite shocked when the proud Ottoman and Mughal empires were seemingly outclassed and humiliated by various European powers. This sense of injustice and humiliation has been much exacerbated by events in the 20th century. One surprising turn of events in the 20th century is the abolishment of the caliphate. The caliphate was a living idea. It was still meaningful to Islam. It wasn't a continuous institution. You can contrast it with the pretty much nearly continuous papacy in Roman Catholicism. The history of the caliphate is more broken and less institutionally unified. And there were times when there were various claimants to being the caliph, the true successor to the prophet. At the turn of the 20th century, the caliphate was held by a man in the Ottoman Empire. But in 1924, the Turkish National Assembly abolished the institution of the caliphate and sent the last caliph, Abdul Majid, into exile. The first president of the secular modern Republic of Turkey declared that, quote, "The idea of a single caliph exercising supreme religious authority over all the peoples of Islam is an idea taken from fiction, not from reality," end quote. The secular leadership viewed this as just an outdated institution that served no purpose in the modern world. There were 3 aborted attempts to restore the caliphate between 1926 and 1931, but it didn't take. Solomon Negosian comments, quote, "To date, nothing has replaced this institution in the Muslim world. Whether Muslim opinion is finally resigned to its loss is difficult to say." End quote. In the 20th century and continuing to the 21st century, there's been a split in many Islamic societies between modernists and traditionalists. Very often the elite, the rulers within the society, are westernized. They're westernized in their education, in their values, in their lifestyle, and in the way they dress. And many of them had gone to college in Western countries like the US or Britain or France. In contrast, many of the masses, many of the people who are ruled over, are very traditional, and they think that the country should be governed according to Sharia, according to traditional Islamic law. This split can be a big problem in modern Islamic societies. In our next segment, the Shia-Sunni divide.